say pepperoni for me real quick?
Let's start this banana boat. Welcome to the Hackaday podcast. My name's Mike Stish. I'm editor-in-chief of Hackaday.
Hi, and I'm Elliot Williams. I'm managing editor of Hackaday. What's going on with you this week, Mike?
Well, I'm not freezing in the central part of the United States, luckily, although I should be because that's where I live. Oh, it's been crazy. Everyone's doing things like getting their hair wet and then going outside and boiling water and throwing it up in the air. In fact, my wife told me there were 9 reported incidents from the emergency room on Wednesday, and 8 of them were frostbite, and 1 of them was scalding from the boiling water trick.
Yeah, my wife, when it got really cold here, was trying to blow soap bubbles outside to get them to crystallize.
I've never done that. Did it work?
It was quasi-successful. She looked up this funny bubble recipe on the internet, and they ended up freezing, but not crystallizing, but then kind of slumping. And so it was slowly deflating balloons. As the air inside cooled, they would shrink down.
The one trick that I have done, speaking of tricks, is the banana trick. Do you know that one?
Nope.
So you have to leave some bananas outside overnight when it's 25 below zero, and then you can use them as a hammer. You can hammer a nail into wood. You have to start the nail with a regular hammer, but then you can bang it all the way in with a frozen banana.
So have you been doing any hacking this week, Mike?
I have been doing hacking, and we probably should get into our regular show order, which is talking about what's new, looking at some of our favorite hacks, and closing up with the articles that you cannot miss from Hackaday this week. So this week I actually got some time to just hack on some stuff, and one thing that has been on my mind is the blue pill, because you recommended it to me something like a year ago. Do you remember that?
Yeah, it's just the cheapest little microcontroller out there because it's a little bit over the hill and seems to be selling for pennies in China.
Yeah, I don't know how they can do this, because I got on AliExpress and ordered one for something like $1.60. And delivery was like another 30 cents. So around $2 or under $2. And you cannot buy, even like in 1,000 quantity, you can't buy the STM32F103 C6T8 microcontroller.
Yep.
Ask me how I know that. I've been looking up a lot of online stuff with it.
Yeah.
But I did what I do for a lot of times, is where I ordered it and then forgot that I ordered it, and it came and I didn't open the envelope, and I threw it in my parts bin, and it sat for a year until last weekend came up, and I had some time to do a project. I pulled it out, and I wanted to get into the libopencm3 library. Have you played with that one at all?
Yeah, but not for a while, actually. I started it up and then started using other things. It's really good for getting USB running on those chips, though. But what were you using it for?
Yeah, I should try that. So I originally pulled it out with an STM Discovery board a couple months ago. I wanted to play with some DMA. I haven't been a huge fan of STM's proprietary libraries, and I came across this and really liked it. I got some DMA proof of concepts up and running in an hour or something like that, and then I really thought about it again. But in the course of maybe 90 minutes on Saturday, I got a new makefile. I'm not good at writing makefiles. I can only write the most basic of makefiles. So I did find someone else that was using OpenCM3 for C++, and it wasn't hard to alter that makefile to work with C. So I got a delayed Blinky with some NOPs. I got the SysTick working, and I got serial transmit and receive, and then I kind of hit a wall with ADC, but I'll get back at some point to get it working.
Well, actually, one thing, when I'm thinking about the F103s, one thing that's really messed up with them is the SPI hardware peripheral has hardware bugs in it. And so everybody who writes a library for it has to do workarounds. And there's a data sheet that specifies how you need to do these workarounds, and it involves restarting the thing, and it's a slight pain in the butt. And one of the nice things about OpenCM3 is that, like the native ST drivers, theirs also has these workarounds in it. So you won't even know that the hardware has buggy SPI drivers in it. But so OpenCM3 is great for that.
Oh, yeah. Now I'm interested in going and looking at that. I also think whoever set up the API scheme for OpenCM3 thinks very similarly to the way I do, and I find it easy to find what I'm looking for and to relate it to the data sheet. So it's really nice.
It was super well thought out, actually. That's one of the biggest strengths of it, besides the fact that it's kind of community driven by folks like us. It's also a really well thought out API. If you're getting into this chip, the other thing you should look at is Chibi OS, and they've got a hardware abstraction layer too that's also pretty good. And I don't know which of those two is my favorite when I have to do C for the little STM chips, but either one of those is worth a look. They're slightly different styles, so if you like the API in libopencm3, you might not like the one in GBOS's hardware abstraction layer, and vice versa.
Is that a real-time operating system?
It is. It's meant to. The OS part is a real-time operating system, but then they split the OS part from the hardware abstraction layer part, and so you can use the HAL without using the operating system too. So it's actually a great resource for those chips.
Love it.
So as my good friend B.A. Baracus would say, enough jibber jabber. Let's get on to the interesting comments of the week.
All right. So my interesting comment thread of the week was on an article called Brushless RC Rocket Tests Different Flight Regimes. Did you read this one?
I did, yeah.
So it's a drone, it's a rocket, it's a missile, it's something. It looks like a missile without tail fins. It has active steering on the bottom of it where there are several brushless RC motors inside of the tube of the body of the missile, and they can be directed by some fins that are inside that diameter as well. But also at the nose of this thing, there are another set of brushless motors and propellers. What is this, Elliot?
Let's stop saying missile right now before we get on some list. What they're doing is they're inspired by the whole SpaceX thing, and they're trying to play around with thrust vectoring and landing a rocket back down backwards. It's like it's fake Falcon Heavy, or whichever it is that they're trying to land.
Yeah, I think
it's not a missile.
Well, so if you
plus it's got a propeller in the nose cone, that disqualifies it already.
If you look up the definition of missile, it's people trying to define what it actually is, and they're saying a rocket is something that sheds mass in order to propel itself, and so this is not a rocket.
Definitely not a rocket. But it's trying to do a lot of the same stuff as a rocket would do with the thrust vectoring and stuff, though. So it's a rocket simulator.
Yeah, so I really enjoyed the project by RC Test Flight. I enjoyed the article by Lewin Day, but what delighted me is the comments debating this pedantic, what is it? What's on your list of favorite hacks this week?
Let's see. There was a Kickstarter for None More Black, was an article by Brian about Black 3.0, and it's going to be super cheap, and it's available on, was it Crowd Supply? Was it Kickstarter? I can't remember. Go read the article. That's not the point. The point was all the good fun in the comments. First of all, we just ran a black banner for that. We didn't put any art in it, and our artist Joe Kim does a lot of good stuff, and the readers actually appreciate this and usually write in the comments, "Man, Joe had great art this week," and somebody of course wrote that in, and they're like, "Joe really captured the black perfectly this week," and I was like, "Yeah, thanks, best Joe Kim art ever."
You can't even see the brush strokes.
Yeah, and then the other, of course, was that this is Vanta Black 3.0 or whatever, and so they're like, black is the new black.
Well, I think it's interesting that it's not Vanta Black 3. This is the Vanta Black competitor. So Black 3.0 is the not Vanta Black because of licensing and some other mishmash. But I do like to see all of the hacks of shining bright lights and shining lasers and this and that at the material to see if it reflects anything back.
And my first thought when I was like, oh, super black stuff is it'll be great for making laser tests. So if you want to see how much power a laser has in it, you shine it at something that absorbs all the energy and you see how much the temperature goes up. And the old school ghetto way of doing this is you take like a piece of metal, usually something pretty light because you want the temperature to go up a lot, and you cover it with soot. And this is now a much better thing to cover it with, and it's cheap enough that maybe it would make a great DIY ghetto laser target to measure laser power. So that was the first thing that came to my mind, and I wasn't the first person to write it in the comments. So good job, commenters. And the other super constructive comment was somebody was saying this is going to be great for coating the interior surfaces of things like telescopes and cameras where you don't want internal reflection bouncing around. Yeah, I think this was a great section, great comment section, because there were some great jokes and then two really good applications of the new pigment if it comes out. And now, after reading it, I might have to get some. What you got next?
I think we're actually into favorite hacks now, and this kind of hits in a longtime favorite of mine. I love seeing things like M&M sorters and Skittles sorters and resistor sorters. Do you remember seeing that one?
Yeah, exactly.
But also, I think Christina Panos has the best titles, and the title is Sorter Uses Cardboard to Organize Card Hoard.
Bingo.
But the gist of the project is building a Lazy Susan turntable that has standard size boxes that can fit playing cards like Magic the Gathering and other games like that. Just the amount of labor that went into making the open-topped cardboard boxes for this is incredible. And then you get into machining out a chaseway for ball bearings and having a way to index this and having a 3D printed drive wheel with a stepper motor in order to reproduce where it stops each time. It's a really beautiful build. It's kind of zen for me to watch a video like this that's so well done on a project that's so interesting.
Cardboard is probably my favorite building material, so I totally know what this person's into. It's my favorite building material for prototypes of anything. Like, I'll put a box in it and start digging holes in it to see where the buttons go. But this one stepped it up a couple notches. I think, don't quote me on this, I'll go check up afterwards. But I think he actually used the waves from the cardboard to make a gear drive on the outside of the thing. So if you look, it's rimmed with the outside of the wavy part of cardboard, and he's using that as the gear.
Yes, that is known as the corrugation layer. It's actually wrong to call this cardboard. This is corrugated. Exactly. And I believe the quote was never again, because each of the corrugated layers was filled with glue or some other substance to make it rigid and solid, and it was really tedious. I have not seen a video from this person before. The guy Masamato, and I will be lurking and stalking this creator from now on because I love it. How about you? What do you have on your fave hacks?
Let's see. One of the ones that really stuck out for me was Genesynth, a Sega Genesis inspired synthesizer. And I'll tell you why. I have a secret passion for FM synthesizers. Like, I'm an old synthesizer nerd. And this one uses a pretty old first generation FM synthesizer chip from Yamaha, the YM2612, which is super accessible. It was in the Sega Genesis, and it was what made the Sega Genesis sound better than other things at the time. In console history, there was kind of the square wavy sounds that came out of the Nintendo, and then there was the Sega Genesis where they put in this first wave of FM synthesis chips that could make, fun if synthetic sounding noises. And then after that, it was all sample-based stuff with the SNES and so on. So this was kind of the golden era of gaming music in some ways. And so the idea is you take this chip out and you make a modern synthesizer out of it that speaks MIDI and etc. The project itself is awesome, gets a great result, sounds really good, but then there's all these little details in it, and you really owe it to yourself to go back and chase them all down. This is done by Thea Flowers. She has to trace down some noise that's coming in her op-amp circuit, so there's a whole bunch of analog stuff there and getting a nice clean audio sound out, which is kind of ironic because the chip itself is a 9-bit DAC on the end, so it's got a lot of funny character. But the idea is if you're a retro gamer, you want that funny 9-bit character to come across in your sound anyway, right? So you want to cleanly reproduce its original distortion.
We want it to be historically bad.
Yeah, exactly. No, you want it to be exactly what it is. You want it to sound like the Sega Genesis is what you really want, right? And that it needs this like ladder effect thing going on. So anyway, there's a ton of interesting bits there about driving these old chips. It was Thea's first real hardware project. And for that, it's a phenomenal success.
This was the first hardware project? That came out great.
Yeah, for sure. And it went through all the phases, right? There's a breadboard phase, and then there's a proto board phase. And when all of that was still too noisy from all the bad analog signal paths, she's like, all right, now I'm going to learn KiCad and make myself printed circuit boards.
Good work. I'm shocked.
Yeah, kudos. And, if I had such an amazing project come out of my first hardware project, I'd be pretty happy with myself. So what's next for you?
I really liked the one this week that Richard Baguli wrote called 3D Printed Microscope Stage Offers Precise Movement. And this, again, is in the category that I'm a sucker for, which is open source lab tools. And in this case, it's not some home hacker. This is actually a person named Richard Bowman at the University of Bath developed a way to precisely move the subject of your microscope view area. And so if you're at a huge amount of magnification and you need to have micro movements on it, your pudgy fingers that always mess things up can stay away while the electronic expertise takes over.
Open source science tools are pretty cool. My guess is it'll change science in the next 20 years by making a lot of things more affordable.
I also look into this. I see the 3D printed gears, which is a great chance to plug our currently running contest, the Hackaday 3D printed gears pulleys and cams contest. But that wasn't the first thing that came to mind when I saw it. I looked at it and I thought to myself, people who started 3D printing in their teens and really got into it through college or high school are surely getting into college now. And if they're working in a lab and don't have a tool that they need and come across an open source design like this, they might already have the fabrication skills that they need to build these. And I think that's going to supercharge what we see with open source lab tools.
Oh, that's an interesting thought. I bet you're right, too.
So check this one out. I think it's really fun. What's next on your list, Elliot?
Speaking of things that tick off our funny little boxes, my next pick is quartet of SMD resistors used to sense Z-axis height. And it's basically taking fairly big, actually, 2512 SMD resistors and mounting them on a printed circuit board and using that as a strain gauge. So when you bend the resistor a little bit, it changes its resistance by just a tiny little bit. And the guy who did it is Russian. His hacker name is Ivdim. Took an off-the-shelf HX711 load cell breakout board, but instead of hooking it up to load cells, he put two of these resistors on the top of the board and two of them underneath, hook them up like a Wheatstone bridge, hook them up to the load cell, and attached it to the hot end of a 3D printer so it could tell when it hit the bed, so it could set the Z-axis accurately. And I love this because resistors shouldn't change their resistance when they undergo physical strain. Like, this is a flaw in a resistor when it does this. It's, it's microphonic. It's something the manufacturers try to get out of it, but it's a physical fact and you can't get away from it. And so he's abusing it. I thought that was pretty cool. People in the comments suggested things like drilling holes in the board, whether this repeated force on this was going to make a strain on the solder joint and stuff. I don't even know what the possible resolution out of something like this is because it has to be a very weak signal. But what I do like is that this is a proof of concept. Can it tell if the hot end is hitting something? The answer is yes. And is it using an obscure physical quantity that isn't intended? Yes. So that's a hack. And I loved it.
Yeah, I love this one too. I didn't even know there were 2512 packages, so that's a win right there. I didn't know that resistors measurably change resistance when flexed, so that's a win there. And I know it's not an empirical proof, watching a demonstration on YouTube, but if you watch the 3D printer trying to do bed leveling with this, it looks really sensitive.
Oh, yeah. No, it should be dead on. The limits there are actually all in the 3D printer, not in the sensor, I'm guessing.
Yeah, and I don't think it's flexing enough to cause long-term damage. I wouldn't worry about the solder joint breaking because it's such a big solder joint, considering the force, the tiny, tiny force that's being put on this. Do you know anything about these load cells? Because I looked at that chip and it really just looked like a precision ADC to me.
So a load cell is actually a piece of metal that's meant to bend under weight, and it's got these weight sensors on them. And commercial weight sensors are really just essentially long wiggly resistors on a piece of Kapton or something, some substrate that bends really easily. And this is actually all there is. An intentional weight sensor is also a resistor that gets bent and changes its resistance. And in that sense, this isn't an interesting project, right? Like, he's just abusing a resistor for the fact that resistors change resistance when they get put under strain, which we knew because that's what all the strain sensors are. But it's a totally weird one because nobody does that with ceramic chip SMD sensor.
I like the hack, and it's really well executed. It makes you think about a lot of different stuff. This is another great article. Go take a look at it. All right, so we've dwelled a long time on our favorite hacks, but I think we should jump into our quick hacks so we can move along in the show.
Let's do it.
All right, you're up first, Elliot. What's your first quick hack?
Let's see. Just mentioning this because it made me laugh was Wi-Fi controlled finger dims lights over UDP. It's a servo motor and a little 3D printed finger that presses a button. There's really nothing to it. It's an ESP8266, and but it was so funny because the finger's printed like this thing out of Dr. Seuss. So it looks like the Cat in the Hat is dimming your light bulb. And I just thought that was marvelous.
I do like that sense of artistry put into what could have been a really boring project. So good on them.
Totally. Okay, you're on.
All right. The Teeny voltmeter uses DNA. So apparently when you're researching at the cellular level, it is very easy to measure voltage in the outer lining of a cell, but it's very hard to measure voltage across the inner part of the cell without destroying the cell or disrupting the cell. And so this is just an interesting read on chemistry hack that uses basically changing colors of a solution in order to indicate the voltage level within the cell that you're testing.
I've got another one. Man, more 3D printing. What is this, 3D printing day? Supportless overhangs just reorient gravity by 90 degrees. And this one's awesome by a guy whose handle is Crits Random. There's really nothing to this. The idea is that when you're doing 3D printing, because it's made layer by layer, you can't print over empty space. And these kind of overhangs are a real problem. And they're, you're limited to 45 or 60 degree overhangs. So what do you do if you need, imagine like a diving board that goes out into nothing that's unsupported on the other end? How do you print that with nothing to lay it on? And Crits Random's brilliant idea here is you just take the 3D printer and you turn it on its side. So you use gravity to your advantage. And instead of trying to print against it, you print with it. And I thought that was a super clever solution. It means you have to sit there and watch your print and at the right time turn your printer sideways.
It's a 5-axis machine tool. It just happens to be that extra axis is manually controlled.
You're the extra axis. That's a good idea. And so people brought this up in the comments that you could actually do this on purpose and you could motorize this extra axis, and there you go. So they came up with your idea. I thought that was really cute.
All right, so we've already been talking about this next one off of mic, I suppose you would say, and we thought we'd bring it into the show. The DIY vacuum table enhances PCB milling. Now, it's just a really beautiful thing to look at. It's a nicely milled vacuum table the size of, a deck of cards that is meant to hold down your PCB while it's being CNC milled, while your circuit is milled on the copper-clad board. What do you think of this one, Elliot?
I think you do that because you can't afford all of the masking tape that I usually use to tape PCBs down to my milling bed. No, I think it's awesome. It's a beautiful piece of work, and it's got a nice... It's just an excellent solution for the problem of how you fix a PCB to the table when you're going to be milling it. There are people who think that milling is the right way to etch PCBs, but...
Yeah, we were talking about that too. Both of us etch PCBs. I use the toner transfer method. Is that what you do as well?
Yeah, me too.
But I avoid it. I do try and avoid it because I don't want to go through the labor process. So if I had a mill, I would do it. I was just over at the design lab in Pasadena, and Dan Hinch was making a custom control board for an upcoming event, and he had 5 or 6 different breakout boards that he made on the other mill. And I looked at it, I'm like, I don't need another mill, but if I had one, I would do that. So in this case, it's probably a hammer looking for a nail.
I don't know. I haven't seen trace separations with milled PCBs that can equal what I can do with toner transfer and etching. And when I do, I will probably change my tune on this, because the thing that PCB mills can do that I can't is they drill the holes too. And I hate drilling holes in PCB boards. So
yeah, and someone in the comments on this one said you should put a sacrificial board below this so that you can also use it for drilling.
Right. Yeah, you can't drill the holes with the vacuum table.
Right, because there's machined steel, or is this machined aluminum under it?
When it's going to start sucking air, what if it might leak enough that it would wiggle off?
Well, the one really nice thing on this is it has indexing pegs. So if you're doing a 2-sided board, you can precisely line up the layers on both sides, and that's something your toner transfer method is not good at, Elliot.
I take the 2 sheets of toner and I put them face to face, and I align them against a window so you can see through them, so you can get the alignment just right. And I use a piece of masking tape, and it holds them together.
Yeah, I do the same thing, but this is going to come out more accurately.
I'm willing to see the result.
It's going to be a head-to-head grudge match between the machine and Elliot.
Exactly. Dude, I'm always in this role of being John Henry against the machine, and John Henry loses. John Henry dies with a steel driving hammer in his hand, ladies and gentlemen. Spoiler.
Yeah, well, I'm the guy who says I can point-to-point solder a single board faster than I can lay it out and etch it.
Man, I say that every time, and about an hour into this horrible point-to-point thing, I'm like, I was wrong again, and I'm wrong every time.
And now I need 2 of them, and so I've just totally blown it out of the water. So, okay, moving along.
Right on. My last one is billiard ball finds new home in custom trackball mouse, and I love the way Dan Maloney wrote this one. It was like Confessions of a Trackball Mouse User, and I think that spoke to me because I used to be a trackball mouse user. In fact, I'm a full-on trackballer. That just came to me.
That's a
trackballer. Come on now.
That's a t-shirt if I've ever heard of one.
Yeah, right? So this is a hack by Adam Hall, and he takes an arcade trackball. He actually goes and he buys one from an arcade supply house, like the old ones you used to have in Centipede or Missile Command or whatever, and turns it into a computer peripheral trackball. And the reason he does this is that he wants to use a pool ball, a billiard ball, as the trackball. And it happens to be that billiard balls are the same size as these old arcade trackballs. So he can do it perfectly. And with that excuse, he goes and custom builds an entire trackball mouse. Highlights of this one, it's 3D printed, so it's completely custom. He took a picture of his hand and laid out the buttons with respect to this picture so that the buttons fell perfectly under his fingers. And last but not least, this is always the case with custom built hardware. You know what the problems are after using it for like a week or 2 later. And he's got a real honest appraisal of, I should have done the scroll buttons differently. And I found this out after using it for 2 weeks, which is always the case when you DIY something. But that's why you DIY it, because you already know how to build one, you can build another one. So I love that project in every way.
Yeah, it's a great custom controller.
Da 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 da. And now let's start talking about the articles you must read from Hackaday.
So Dan Maloney got onto an article about exoskeletons, and while he was working on this, I kept finding more news stories about exoskeletons just organically. And so I didn't realize how big of a thing this is becoming. So it's really worth time to go and read The Cyborgs Among Us, Exoskeletons Go Mainstream.
Yeah, it's one of these things where it's in the air, and once you pick up on it as a thing, you start to see it everywhere.
Yeah, so I guess there's a wider range of tools as well. It's basically robot-assisted humanity. And part of it could be military use where it's meant to take off the weight of the backpack and the equipment that you're hauling. But I think for me, I really resonate with the much wider uses, which would be people that have been in a car accident and had spinal injury and are unable to walk, may be able to walk very close to normally by having robot legs velcroed to the outside of their biological legs and controlling them with sensors that can read the nerve impulses coming down their spine. And that is empowering, and it makes you feel good. And it's something that most of us can get behind, spending hundreds and hundreds of hours trying to make happen. Well, then I also have family in the Michigan and Ohio area who worked their entire career at the assembly plant for automotive. And it's really hard on your body. Like it's obvious to see them move around that job took a toll. And so one of the parts of this story is Ford and other auto manufacturers are working on robot assist for the assembly workers. So if you're working on an assembly line that's overhead and you have to have your arms above shoulder height the whole day, the robot has what amounts to a rest for your elbows that will automatically go into place and lock in place when you need it. So you can do the work and it gives your body a little bit of respite. And I think using technology to reduce the impact of these jobs that need to be done but are hard on your body is really powerful way to improve people's lives.
That was the part of the article that resonated the most with me as well. And if you've ever painted a ceiling or something, you know how that feels after a day of doing that. And then you imagine going into work doing that every day.
Have you ever seen one of those sitting wheelchairs in public, the ones that can convert themselves?
No.
So I've seen those in public. Yeah, I have. I've seen at least one. I'm trying to think if I've seen more than one. But I was thinking, I was just seeing those on Hackaday. We were writing about them 8 or 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And so now that I've seen them in public, I look at this and I think, how long will it be before I see someone using one of these exoskeletons in public? And I hope it's not long. All right, what's on your articles you can't miss list?
Let's see. One of our writers, Jenny, has been covering drone sightings for quite a while now, since early 2016, actually. And her latest article in this series is Drone Sightings, a New British Comedy Soap Opera. For a little background, there's been, right before Christmas, Gatwick, a major London airport, was shut down because there was a drone scene. And this just happened again at Heathrow. Conspicuous in all of this is that nobody has evidence of a drone at all. There's, how many people are there with a cell phone, and there are 0 pictures of drones. You would presume that they had, some kind of surveillance at these airports, and there's no pictures of drones. And what there is, of course, eyewitnesses. I don't really know what to say about that. People see things sometimes, and especially with new technology like this, there can be mass hysterias. If you think back in the 50s about UFO sightings, people didn't really see UFOs until there were science fiction movies. And then once there were science fiction movies, people were seeing UFOs all the time. And I'm not saying UFOs aren't real. I'm just saying UFOs aren't real. No, so anyway, back to her first article on the series that I'd love to talk about. She looks at 6 different cases of drone sightings in the UK, and one of them was soon afterwards admitted to be a plastic bag. 2 or 3 of these sightings were at heights above 2,000 feet. And if you've got a drone, you know that you don't have the battery power to get up to 2,000 feet and do much for very long, if at all. In one case, the drone made a U-turn and flew off at estimated speeds in excess of 300 miles per hour. Again, there's no way a drone is doing this. I don't know what these pilots who file these reports are seeing, but it doesn't sound like they're drones to me. And that was the point of this article of hers. After the Gatwick closure, the police were looking for people who did it. They rounded a couple people up, charged them, and then let them free because they didn't do it. The Gatwick closure was remarkable because there were only a few sightings of drones, and they closed the airport. Fast forward a couple weeks, and then you get the Heathrow one where there were a few sightings of drones, and then there were a whole ton of sightings of drones after the first couple went live. And Jenny, in her latest article, raises the possibility that this second wave of reports was actually a police helicopter. And so she has a friend who went through and looked at the flight records and discovered that there was a police helicopter flying around. Who knows, it might have been investigating that first drone report, but there was a police helicopter flying around, and I think that got misreported by the vast majority of these people as being a drone.
Yeah, so ADBS or ADSB is the transponder protocol that aircraft carrying human passengers, full-size aircraft, have these transponders on them. Right. And it's not an encrypted protocol, so you can hear these transponders. And so there are base stations around, and you can just go on an open website and search flight paths and transponder historically. So they were able to look this up.
Yeah, you go to FlightAware and look it up, and you know that there was a helicopter there at that point in time.
Right. But you think about this situation, this was, I believe, at night, so it was dark. You're looking up into the sky, so there aren't trees and buildings and other things that would give you a sense of scale. And so something that's very large and is up in the sky but is quite a long way away might look like a small flying item, even though it's way too far away to be that.
Yeah, and I think Jenny's point here is that there may be a bit of a hysteria going on, and people are prone to see drones because of especially with the second incident, they're prone to see drones because of the first incident. And that would also play tricks with people's heads. And this is, again, reminiscent of the UFO scare of the 50s and 60s.
Well, if you say, everybody look up in the sky and look for a drone, somebody saw one, you're going to have...
I heard there was a drone over Heathrow.
Yeah, you're going to have people that have false reports. Even if there's legitimately a drone in the area, you're going to have false reports.
Anyway, the point is not that you should be flying drones around airports. You absolutely shouldn't. That's illegal, and nobody should be doing that. It's a safety hazard, and it's no good. But at the same time, I think there's a burden of proof on the airports and on the journalists who then go and write stories saying there were drones here. There's a little bit of a burden of proof there to actually find a drone to make the scapegoat for this. And Jenny ends this article with, "Show us the drones."
Yeah.
And I'm actually totally with her. I think not drone until proven guilty.
Well, I do want to qualify that. I think if it's suspected that there is something being flown around in that airspace, yes, grounding those airplanes and investigating it is a prudent thing. Like, we want to avoid accidents where people's lives are at risk. But then after the fact, they need to go and find that proof, because these incidents, if they keep getting reported as drone sightings and as drone disruptions, eventually are going to drive legislation. And if we're driving legislation and regulation, those should be based on fact.
Yep. And if this goes down in the FAA record, or whatever the British equivalent is, as being a closure due to a drone invasion, it'd be really good to know for sure that it was a closure due to a drone invasion.
That sounds so cyberpunk.
Dude, I tell you what.
All right, our time here today is drawn to a close. As always, if you want to get in contact with us, you can email editor@hackaday.com. We're always depending on you, the Hackaday audience, to show us what is interesting in the greater hacking world. So if you find something fun or build it yourself, don't be bashful. Reach out to us at tips@hackaday.com. And until then, keep on hacking.
We are in the podcast.
We're not in the podcast. We're in the pre-roll. Let's get into it, okay? Once you pop, you can't stop.